Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
Welcome to episode 1 of Off Season for Almost Cooperstown.
Yeah, this is a kind of a period of time where, the baseball season's not in full swing anymore. We're really not even at free agency yet. So
we had awards last week.
We got our awards last week, but more we wanted to use this time to talk about stuff that it's not as necessarily related to players or what's going on in baseball. It kind of gives us a chance to talk about some, maybe more esoteric things when it comes to baseball.
How the game has changed.
How it's evolved over time, or even just kind of fun things about the game.
So we're going to talk about baseball and technology, and there has been technology around baseball in one form or another for a very long time. I noted that even before the Civil War, baseball was the first sport to institute a box score, which was a bit of technology, right? Because you actually had a record of what happened.
Exactly. You wouldn't think of that as technology, but that relates to everything. And baseball arguably a pretty low-tech sport, and the technology certainly hasn't evolved that much since those times. A bat's still a big thing of wood. It's just how that process of making it has been refined greatly.
So, we're not going to talk about, but over the years, the introduction of the catcher's mask. But in 1904 was the introduction of protective cups. This has been a very positive thing for baseball players since that time.
Yeah, I think there's nobody that is unhappy with that development.
And we'll talk a little bit about speed in the game, particularly in how you measure it. I found an interesting article on speeding that Babe Ruth was involved in back in 1921. He was arrested twice for speeding. He was driving 27 miles an hour. And then the second time he was speeding in 21, he was sentenced to a day in jail. Now, a day in jail at that time ended at 4 p.m., which was after the 3:15 start of the Yankee game. Since he was going to miss the start of the jail, he had to race 9 miles. You got to think about this. Police motorcade to the Polo Grounds to replace Chicken Hawk, who was the hitter at the time, a guy named Chicken Hawk.
This is like a cartoon.
I love stories like this.
Yeah.
And he was arrested for speeding again, and he hadn't had a driver's license valid for 10 years. But the speeding limit was 27 miles. He was 27 miles, which is about 15 miles over the limit. So we took all that, and they tried to measure baseball players and how fast they threw the ball, Walter Johnson being the big train and throwing it fast. And I don't really know that they had any measure.
No, they probably, and certainly if they did have any kind of measurement, it probably wasn't accurate or correct. It was probably wildly off.
But we're going to talk first about today's game, right? And technology, I think everybody realizes, is a big part of the game.
I think you even kind of mentioned it before. You said, back in 1850 something, you had the development of the scorebook and, taking the box score. And now look at, you have an entire divisions in baseball front offices dedicated to sabermetrics, which is invented stats that have essentially come out of the box score.
Yeah, we have Bill James in a large part to thank for the invention of sabermetrics, but it's gone way beyond that from 1974 when that first came around.
The evolution of the technology of trying to quantify a player's success and contributions to individual games and over a season it's grown so much comparatively to, what it once was, which was just, yeah, he went 3 for 3 today.
Right. Statistically, it was what's his average? How many RBIs did he have? Did he hit any doubles, triples, or home runs? Pretty much.
Yep. That's all you had.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what we see today? If you watch baseball on TV in particular, you see the game a little differently than you do if you're in the park.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of talk about two things today because I think it's kind of two interesting topics, and I think they kind of go hand in hand because unintentionally or not, I think people conflate them to a degree, and that's robot umpires and then the strike zone box that you see on TV.
Robot umpires.
Yeah, robot umpires. There was in the independent league used robot umpires last season. It was something, I think they've actually been maybe doing it for more than one, but they've been doing it for a bit. Basically, the idea is that you have it's like a 3-camera system that's taking shots of the ball as it crosses the plate.
Oh, it's not like C-3PO back there umpiring.
No. But it was interesting. One from, it was interesting. I was reading about it and the pitchers loved it. They loved the robot umpires because they were getting way more high strikes than they normally do, because that's something umpires just generally don't particularly call. So they were calling it based on the rule book for where it is, and it seems like the regular umpires just don't call high strikes as much. So the pitchers really liked it, and what they also noticed is that there was less, the people they didn't get as worked up about individual pitch calls, which is even something Torrey has talked about. Like, managers can't keep getting ejected over balls and strikes.
It's funny. I'll take it to tennis for a second because, the invention of Hawkeye in tennis and automatic line calling has taken some of the dynamic out of tennis, because you don't have McEnroe or anybody like that going nuts anymore because the linesman clearly, in his eye, missed the call. You basically go to replay. It was either in or was out. You get a couple of challenges. It's by the book.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't have, and it's not like you can't challenge the robot umpires. That's the thing. They let them in, and they take another look at it to see if did it just miss.
In this league, they allowed independently. They allowed you to challenge.
They allowed you to challenge an individual ball or strike.
Did they have an amount of challenges that you know about?
It didn't. The article that I was reading didn't say, but it was. But so they liked it. So that's actually the robot umpire, which is different than like the pitch FX thing that you see on TV. Now, how accurate do you think that pitch FX thing is? You don't need to give me a number.
I'd say it's very accurate. Very, very accurate.
Not even close. Huh? Wildly inaccurate.
Wow, and from a science perspective, you think they've got the whole camera system set up where it goes through a particular zone, and either it's in that zone, it's a strike, or a ball.
So here's a couple of the reasons why it's super inaccurate. So one is just measurement errors. So each individual stadium has to calibrate it to the batters in the batter's box, and they have an error tolerance of 1.5 inches horizontally and 1.1 inches vertically. Except, spoiler warning, they don't necessarily always stick to those dimensions. They've had measurement differences, so like going back to 2007, in the Metrodome Stadium, they had a difference horizontally of 2.7 inches at some points. So think about, if you're viewing that, the difference you're going to see, where you're going to be like, how is that not a strike?
And you know how wide home plate is, right? It's 18 inches.
Yeah. So 2 inches off the almost 3 inches.
1.5% difference.
Yeah,
right there,
that's a big difference. And then the other
15%. I'm sorry.
The other issue is that over the course of the game, that triangulated position is actually going to drift because of people moving in the stadium and the vibrations. So it's not actually always going to represent the correct location the whole game. And also, here's probably something you haven't noticed. Have you ever noticed that there's really not much of a difference in the size of the box when, like, Jose Altuve gets up to bat and then, like, some giant guy comes up after him? It's not that different in size, is it? But they should have radically different strike zones.
Of course, I mean, you think about, we talked about Eddie Gadel in our episode with the midget played baseball, and he had a strike zone and that was, 10 inches long.
So that doesn't necessarily represent it there. And then you have the major issue of catcher reception. So, like, if a catcher flubs a pitch low in the zone, even if it's a strike, the umpire is always going to call it a ball, because that's what we've always done in baseball. If you flub the catch, you almost never get the strike call. Like, the only way you can do that is, like, you literally hit the catcher in the chest with the thing. I mean, that happened in high school a few times, but, like, it's not happening in the majors too much. And so, like, there's still even further issues. So, like, you have to actually set the vertical bounds of the strike zone for each batter. So if you're not, the PFX, the system doesn't take into account that's changing with every batter. So it's going to mark things as being a strike for one guy. That's not a strike for
You would think the technology is there to do that.
But they haven't gotten there yet. And so that's a major issue. And then you also have these issues where, like, because it's a 2D thing laid over a 3D plane, you can have pitches with late movement and break that come back over the zone that for the box, because of the box is situated towards the front of the plate, if it comes back over at the last second on the box, it'll look like it was out of the strike zone, but it was actually a strike.
Right. You can get really in the weeds if you think about how would you create this sort of tunnel that would cover all of the strike zonable area around home plate, right? On both sides, both edges, to the front, to the back, you have this sort of, area that is anything that touches that is a strike.
Mm-hmm. So, like, and then there's the two different types of boxes. The one where it's like, you have like the cutout, it's on the side of the screen and you see the boxes coming in. That's not as bad, but it's somewhat accurate. The one where it's like over the plate.
Well, 3D like, yeah.
It's just an overlay. It's completely inaccurate.
Oh, okay. So
you can trust the one where it's coming in. That one you're mostly going to miss those edge cases where like it's bending over the edges.
But you should get the vertical
But you'll get the vertical in the horizontal for the most part. It's going to be like the pitches with a lot of late movement that it's going to miss, and they're not going to do a great job of. It's also not going to communicate to you the difference in the batter's height and those. And then the one that it's an overlay over the actual plate, forget about it.
So it sounds like, based on what you found out, it would seem that these robot umpires with the multiple cameras would more likely be where things would head as opposed to
correct. And you even have interesting things. So, like, how many new umpires do you think were in the major leagues last year?
Well, because it's a coronavirus season, I don't really know how many of the umpires might have opted out. But let's say there's 100 umpires, and maybe there's 20 new ones. There would be 20 this year, but in a normal year, it might be less than 5.
Yeah, so this year, it was 10 new major league umpires, mostly because of opt-outs. So because people decided, I don't want to umpire this year because of COVID-19.
You're standing right, you're breathing on the darn catchers.
Exactly. So they have something called a 50%. So this is an article from Baseball Prospectus, and they're talking about a 50th percentile pitch. So from what I understand, this is basically the average pitch. So it has the average chance of being a strike or a ball. So you're not talking about like a 95 percentile pitch, which is like one of those DeGrom fastballs that's perfect. But so when you were talking about these 50th percentile pitches, in 2018 and 2019, over the first 2 weeks of the season, home plate umpires averaged from about a -5% to a 7% average on calling them as strikes. So some guys were calling them as high as 57% strikes of those were strikes, and some guys were as low as 45%. So, I mean, a pretty big swing, but not that much. This year, when you introduce all of these new umpires, they were at -10 and +10 on either side of that. So you had guys calling these average pitches 40% of the time strikes and 60%. So that's a huge swing in how much variance you were getting game to game with individual umpires, which is why I think you're going to see a push to move towards robot umpires.
And the umpires will still be on the field, right? I don't think any of us are advocating a place where you don't have umpires and the game is sort of techno.
I want umpire. I think umpires in the field make sense. One is faster and more conducive to the game because an umpire in the field can give a signal on a fair ball. They can immediately do that. Whereas if you have to wait for some kind of technological signal, that's a lot harder.
Right.
But I think for something like balls and strikes, you remove the guesswork, because if you're able to somehow create a 3D plane where you can track whether or not something is passing through that accurately, that's always going to be more accurate than the human eye.
But think about the behavioral change also. So as long as baseball's been around, you've had pitchers understanding who's behind the plate that day, and the catcher too, knowing that, oh yeah, this guy calls the high strike or he calls the low strike, inside, outside. And so you actually would outline your pitching plan based upon maybe the way this umpire is at particular points in the game or all the time. Even.
And it would be really interesting because there are guys that you can clearly tell. We've all seen it when a guy's just not getting the benefit of the doubt on calls.
Right.
And you're like, that's a strike for other guys. And so the question is, in those cases, are you going to see a regression from the top pitchers because who knows how much deference they are actually being paid and getting calls that they shouldn't? Or are you going to see the lower guys like rise up because of that? Because you're going to see the question of, was it the good pitchers getting calls or the bad pitchers not getting calls?
Right. And maybe a guy who you didn't think was as good as he was had just had a movement on his pitch that was never getting called a strike, and all of a sudden
it is actually a strike, and all of a sudden he turns into a monster because he's able to locate for strikes where he couldn't before.
I would think that everybody is fairly convinced that in some way we're going to get away from the way baseball has been called behind the plate, with just an umpire deciding high, low, inside, whatnot, and you're going to have technology be a part of this, and perhaps even the lead part of this.
And I definitely recommend it if you're interested in it. There was actually a paper that I read that while I was doing research for this from Illinois, illinois.edu. It's tracking pitches for broadcast television, and it's basically talking about how they actually track it for that. And I'll attach it to this episode. I think it's something interesting that if anybody's curious about, you should definitely take a few minutes to read through. It's only about like 6 pages.
So we've come around the way things are today, and really the technological innovations in baseball started to me with the radar gun. right? That was a big difference instead of trying to measure all these scientific ways when they were trying to measure Bob Feller back when he was pitching in the 30s and 40s. They didn't have radar, so they'd have to do all kinds of stopwatch things. And,
it was probably wholly unscientific. And
it was scientific. It just may not be, the measurement was so difficult to be
probably
confident
not
in.
Yeah.
So in 1974, a guy named allegedly, right? Because this story has pretty much been credited to Danny Litweiler, who is the guy who came up with the radar gun. He had read in the Michigan State student newspaper about a campus policeman pointing a new device at cars called a radar gun to catch speeders. And suddenly an intriguing idea popped, and you get the rest, right?
I'm just saying, think about the guy. He's like, he hears some cop popping people with a new device, and the first thing this dude thinks is, I bet I can measure how hard pitchers are throwing with this thing.
So he gets one of these guns, and he goes to from a police officer, and the officer drives over to the field. And of course, you got to have a good story here. And initially, the gun registered 75 miles an hour on one of the pitches, but the reading was on a flat portion of the field. So he asked the police officer to drive his car near the pitcher's mound, since the radar gun was attached to it. This time, the pitch registered 85 miles an hour. The gun caught about 75% of the pitches thrown. And then he wrote to Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, and that is basically how every team in the major league right after had radar guns that started measuring, all these different pitchers. And the scouts got them, right. And you'd see scouts in all these schools.
Oh yeah, I mean, we saw it. You'd see like the group of guys sitting in the stands, all holding a little gun, just sitting there holding it, and then they would, the pitch would get thrown. They'd all look, just scribble down the number, and then they'd only need to do that for a couple innings, and then they all go. Right.
So Litweiler came up with what ends up being the Jugs gun, which we've heard about for years, right? And then there's another gun called the Decatur Ragun, or Ray Gun, Ragun, and that's said to measure the speed of the ball closer to the batter at home plate. So the Jugs gun is known as the fast gun, and the Ray Gun is known as the slow gun. And you'll go to different parks, and you'll see all of a sudden, wow, he's really throwing hard.
I think the players are even aware of which stadiums use which guns, because they know that, like, okay, if you're in the stadium and you're looking up and saying this pitcher is throwing this hard, you'll know which way it's actually going, because you're like, there's no way that pitch was only 95. It's because it probably was actually 98. Or you're like, there was no way that pitch was 101.
So another innovation that came around the same time as radar guns had nothing to do with electronics. It had to do with surgery. Right. That's the Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
Talk about changing baseball. Think about how that changed baseball.
Yeah, because you have to wonder how many guys before that just had some kind of injury they didn't really know. Like, because I'm sure they had injuries, but I don't even know if they really knew specifically. They're like, something's wrong, and you can't do this anymore.
I don't know that much before 1974 they knew about the ulnar collateral ligament.
Yeah, exactly. Like they might have, but like.
And so that surgery was to stabilize the elbow, reduce or eliminate pain, or restore stability or range of motion. And this procedure was first done in Tommy John in 1974, where they replaced a tendon from another part. And he was able to pitch for years after that, Tommy John. And that since that time, number of pitchers have not only come back from that, but have come back and become real stars. They even suggest at times that it would be better sometimes for a pitcher to actually tear it so that they could get rid of it and would be stronger with what they put in, almost like Bionic Man kind of stuff.
It is interesting because it's like, that's not necessarily a baseball technological specific breakthrough, but at the same time, you really don't hear about many people that aren't baseball players needing Tommy John surgery.
Exactly. They don't say it in football or maybe in tennis sometimes. So we talked a little about sabermetrics, and I'm a fan of Bill James and what he did with Baseball Perspectives.
I mean, who isn't if you're a big baseball fan?
And Jay Jaffe, who worked there, who split off and now is with Fangraphs, and they measure things slightly differently, but all of that data was something that wasn't around.
And it's certainly something that sets baseball apart. I mean, you have some similar websites for other sports, but baseball is certainly probably the most advanced in the terms of advanced statistics for their sport.
Exactly, and because there's 162 games in most seasons, and you have all these at bats, there's just a trove of data in baseball that it's hard for me to imagine any sport really coming close in terms of having just the sheer amount just in a regular season, much less a sport being around for 130 years.
Correct, and the nature of baseball also lends itself fantastically to creating
because it's slow, and so you can talk about things and you can look at stuff. You look at the board, you see it's 3-2 is an 85-mile-an-hour curveball, and there's two runners on.
This and this.
Exactly. You have all these types of stuff. So I'll talk some more and tell me what you think about these different aspects of changes in technology that are more recent. Instant replay. Change the game?
For the better.
Okay. And I agree. That was only 2014 that came into play.
And I think it's maybe because, especially as people that watch a lot of football, it's felt like something that should be part of the game for such a long time. Like, we have the ability to, and I'm glad we have it.
You can't argue about the bad call, right? The 1985 World Series with the Royals and the Cardinals, where Denkinger called George Orta safe, ended up leading to, it was wrong as it turned out on replay, but they didn't have replay then. Royals win.
You can't, you don't have a guy like Galarraga losing his perfect game because of a blown call anymore.
Right.
And it's better for the umpires because weirdly, even though your individual call on the field can essentially be shown up and be proven wrong, it no longer follows you forever.
Get the call right.
It's much better to have it overturned in that moment than to have the ignominy of being the umpire that made the wrong call for the rest of your life.
And we know it takes too long, and it's crazy sometimes when there's challenges and that take three. I think it was Rich Gossage complained that who died in the last 100 years because of a bad call. But you just don't want to have that be the determining factor.
Right. You don't want to have that black mark on a game where everything was going great, but then you have to always be like, yeah, but if the ump hadn't blown that call at first base, it would have been a different game.
So StatCast is something that's become very popular. That's more for the fans than I think.
Yeah, I think, and the thing is, the StatCast is also, it's not necessarily an advancement of the game, it's an advancement of their ability to deliver you statistics.
Well put. Right. But it is something that we sort of take as part of the granted.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about what probably watching a game back in the day was like. You watched a game, and now you didn't have any of the player stats. They certainly didn't get updated live during the game. Now, even on TV, everything that guy did, not just in this at-bat, but his last 17 at-bats, his average, his RISP, everything.
So here's something, and as a former pitcher, how do you feel about protective pitcher helmets? That's a new innovation coming into the game.
Like for them wearing when they're pitching?
Yep.
I wouldn't want to pitch with it on. It would feel very uncomfortable. But I imagine if it's the kind of thing where you start it with the younger kids and you're going to have to, that's the easier way to get it. Don't try and get the pitchers that have pitched their whole life wearing a cap to wear it because it's going to be hard and they're going to fight you every step of the way. Well, instead, just get kids used to it when they're starting in 10, and then in 10 years, everybody's going to come up, be used to it, and be doing it anyway.
So a few years ago, they asked Mark Melanson, who just, I think, pitched in the World Series. Mm-hmm. He was a closer of the Pirates at the time, and he said, it actually, I was really impressed with it. It feels very evenly distributed. It felt like a regular hat. I think eventually you're going to have pitchers wear helmets. It's just safer.
I'm not saying you're not going to. I'm just saying I think my way is, I think you're going to get way less pushback if you do it the way I suggested.
So. How about Pitch FX?
That's what I was kind of talking about. And I think for the fans, it's nice because you get a better sense. You get a somewhat enhanced sense of where the ball was crossing the plate. I think the problem is that not only do you have the issue of the system itself being rather inaccurate, but you also have to deal with the fact that because of the angle at which you're watching the broadcast from over the pitcher's shoulder, you're not seeing home plate from a dead-on angle, which means balls are going to look differently to you just based on that, too. Right.
And the stats can get a little bit crazy when you're going to say, well, off of Clayton Kershaw's curveball, hitters have hit 0.029 last July. I'm like, oh, okay, you're just killing me with too many statistics.
There's a point where statistics start getting so hyper specific that they cease to be useful.
I completely agree. I came up with, there's also some technology that I think might fall into the same. If you think about how baseball is using it, I'm going to name some other things you might find. Something called K-Vest. Ever heard of that?
Nope.
Okay, so K-Vest places sensors on a batter's upper torso, pelvis, and lead arm and hand to capture motion for a detailed analysis of swing efficiency. 200 data points per second.
See, the question is it's not that I don't think data from that is useful. I question anybody's ability to take that data and then go to the batter and inform him how to make a more meaningful change based off of that.
I think J.D. Martinez was a guy who used K-Vest, and it certainly benefited the change in his game.
So there must be something you can interpret from that data that I don't understand.
So there's something called Kinetrax.
Nope.
Right? I hadn't heard of this either. It consists of 8 to 16 high-speed synchronized video cameras installed on the first and third baselines to capture every movement of the pitcher and hitter. It then takes 3D rotational and positional data for every joint in their bodies. It takes about 10 hours to turn the footage into data, which can enable enable them to identify subtle shifts in the mechanics that might be deployed by major league teams. Wow.
That could be really useful because you might be able to determine something like if a pitcher, that might determine subconscious movements that would alert you to a pitcher tipping his pitches.
Right. And they're just trying to get situational data points.
Right, because the hitter might not even realize it consciously that the pitcher is tipping the pitches, but the pitcher is doing something that the batter is seeing them, and it's just giving them a better jump on whatever they're throwing.
So, this is not really for the fans kind of stuff, but they have something called Edgartronic and Rapsodo, and these are all high-speed video cameras that measure, multiple points on the journey of a ball or a player's swing, and everybody is using it as the point.
Yeah, because now what they're seeing is getting proper high, what they realize is just having originally when video came out and now you had the ability to take video of players, that was a gigantic advancement because nobody had that before and nobody knew how to use it. But now that we've had it for long enough, just a single head-on shot of a pitcher and a batter, from behind the pitcher, that's not telling you enough of the information, and you won't be able to pick up important things without being able to essentially get a full three-dimensional view of the field.
So I think the technology, as we would admit, has come a long way. I'm not sure how much farther we're going to be able to go for the fan to really enjoy the game, because at a certain point, I think you just want to watch the game on the field, and already the screens are getting more and more when you're watching it at home, for instance, crowded.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just they're just throwing stats at you that are just meaningless. The batters are batting .88 against the third curveball Clayton Kershaw throws every Thursday night when games start at 8 p.m. It's that's such a hyper pointless stat. There's a point where all of you're going overboard and you're not actually giving me the information I want. Sometimes they're so busy flashing stats at you that you don't even know what the guy's done in the game.
And I know you're a guy who likes to play video games, and you think about the amount of information when you're watching a tournament on video games. There's lots of data points on there.
Interestingly though, it's lots of data points that are only specific to the game that is being played at that moment. So for instance, if you're talking about Counter-Strike Global Offensive, right? You would never have this player has this kill death assist record over this map. That would never be what's up.
Wouldn't indicate his tendency at that particular moment?
What you would see if you saw stats would be his stats for that specific map. So you would see he's got 23 kills, 10 deaths, and 6 assists on this map.
Not that he's really good at this particular thing over the past 2 years.
Exactly. Partly because they don't necessarily have those statistics developed a lot of the time, but two, people aren't necessarily people don't necessarily know how to judge that statistic yet. So I think that's also the thing where you could flash a lot of the more advanced baseball statistics at people, Andrew McCutchen is averaging, 1.6 more WAR at center field over the last 3 seasons compared to other people. But does the average baseball fan know how to look at that piece of information and actually make use of it?
No, probably not. I think baseball fans could understand speed on the field. How long does it take the guy to run to first base? How fast can he run from first to home on a double to the gap?
Which is why things like launch angle and bat speed and exit velocity are so popular, because those are immediately transferable concepts that everybody can understand. Launch angle, okay, yeah, he hit that ball super high into the air. That was straight up. Or exit velocity, that thing got out of here in a hurry. You don't need, everybody gets that.
But we've come such a long way, obviously, because players become aware of maybe what they thought wasn't an asset, maybe is an asset, or the reverse, or something that they were doing. It used to be down and hard, right? You would tell everybody when you're teaching kids how to play baseball, hit the ball down and hard, hit it through a hole, hit it on the ground. It's hard to feel. Maybe when you're a kid, coming up, and whatnot, and then all of a sudden you come to launch angle and go, no, I probably shouldn't hit it on the ground. I should try to hit it in the air. That's a big philosophical change.
Well, I think that also is probably
technology.
Oh, just from technology, but I think that also relates to the fact that it's way more likely for kids to make an error on a ground ball than a pop-up, I feel like. So,
but I'm saying that's ingrained in you from a young age, because that's the way coach, and it used to be that way even at the big league level.
But you could even have technological shifts. Looking back at Babe Ruth back in the day, the bat that he swung was 40 something ounces or
Right, I think he had a 38-ounce bat, which,
yeah. And now like the heaviest guy in the majors uses like a 33-ounce bat or something.
That amazed me, right? Then you see, big time hitters using 33. Aaron Judge swings a 33-ounce bat. Babe Ruth swung a 38 and even up to 42.
Because if you have a 42-ounce bat, all you have to do is make contact and that thing is going to go. But with the 30, but what having a 33-ounce bat allows you to do is it allows you to replace the force generated by having a solid piece of wood with just sheer velocity.
F equals ma.
Yeah, and you can generate more acceleration, and that's going to get more force, and you're going to probably be able to muscle balls that you wouldn't otherwise be able to muscle.
And I think we're going to do an episode on baseball bats over the years and how they've changed, because there's a lot of interesting things. But in the dead ball era, they played those heavier bats because they were just trying to serve the ball into the outfield a lot of the time, or just between people, and they weren't trying to hit home runs because the ball wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you're going to just see a shift over time because you have things like, look at Jeff McNeil. You've got Jeff McNeil with his handleless bat. I think bats are interesting in terms of technological because that's the one area where the actual advancement of the technology has had a profound impact and change, because cleats changing, gloves change. Gloves changing, I think, is an interesting discussion.
That happened a long time ago, though.
But that happened a long time, and I don't think gloves in the 70s are fundamentally that different than gloves today.
I think it might have been the 70s where they ended up with the catcher throat protector, where it came off the bottom of the catcher's mask. And that was a big technological innovation, right? That certainly catchers appreciated, not taking a foul ball to the throat.
Yeah, I'm sure they loved that.
So, the equipment has changed over the years, but really not so much, anymore. And it's more about analysis, data, and using technology to help you become a better player and maybe a more knowledgeable fan.
I think that's, definitely. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.